Good morning, all. Well, as you heard, I'm Natalia Saltalamacchia. I'm the head of the International Relations Department here at ITAM. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Alan Stoga, who is a renowned strategist and political analyst. Mr. Stoga has extensive experience in communications and public relations, corporate consulting, digital media, geopolitics, banking, and government. Currently, he serves as the executive chairman of the Tallberg Foundation, as well as president of Semi-Communications, a New York-based firm that provides geopolitical and business intelligence information to global corporations. Previously, he was managing director of Kissinger Associates, founded a strategic communications company and a private equity firm, was a member of the board of Alliance Capital's International Fund Complex, and served as chief economist for the Bipartisan National Commission on Central America, which was created by President Reagan in the 1980s. Mr. Stoga has economics and international degrees from Michigan State and Yale University. He will be sharing with us his insights on the electoral perspectives in the United States, but most importantly, at least to me, because I'm an internationalist, he will be touching the issues of the increasingly complex geopolitical landscape that we are all facing in this year, 2024. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Alan Stoga.
Thank you very much. I want to start by saying two things. One, welcome to the Year of the Dragon. We need to think about how the Chinese are thinking about the world. May it be a good year for all of you. Secondly, I want to thank the rector and the dean for the amazing work they have done building this institution. This is one of those places, this is an anchor tenant in the world in terms of critical thinking, in terms of building great leaders for the future, and indeed in terms of helping make Mexico a better place. So thank you very much. Thank you. It's amazing. I identify, because everybody now identifies in universities, I identify as a hopeful pessimist. So that is by way of an initial apology. If I depress the hell out of you, I'm really sorry. But I do think we need to look at the issues as they are and the challenges that we face. So I'm going to talk about these 5 things. This is the year of the elections everywhere. It is the year of Trump. It is the year of war, unfortunately. I want to talk a bit about the new geopolitics, but also then, with apologies to Donald Rumsfeld, about known unknowns. The year of the election. Something on the order of half of the people on the planet are going to vote this year in national elections or in regional elections. It's never happened before. Where we start this year is not going to be where we end this year. It's a bit like the kids' game of pick-up sticks, that you throw them up in the air and see what happens, what patterns come when they come down. 7 of the 10 most populous countries have elections. Mexico as well as the United States. Not a one of these is considered by the professional democracy folks as a full democracy. If you look at the countries around the world and you look at things like Freedom House and other organizations that think about democracy, they would tell you that only 15% of countries today are full democracies, 30% are full autocracies, and everybody else, you and us, are in the middle somewhere. Flawed, hybrid, something. Nonetheless, we're all going to vote this year. Generalization is always difficult, but when they only give you an hour, that's what you have to do. What's going to happen? This is a year where if you're a betting woman, bet against the incumbent. You will win far more than you lose. This is not the year of the incumbent, because in country after country after country, the society is angry. It believes that the social contract is not delivering. It wants something else. Now, that said, asterisk, I guarantee you that President Putin will be reelected. That there are some known knowns in this world, and that's one of them. And if you want, we should talk about the Russian election, because although you know the outcome, the process, they actually use the process a bit like Mexico used to use the process in the old days. It's about getting people engaged with the leader. So it's terribly important how they do it. They push out a lot of goodies. You all remember that. But it's an important election. The politics of anger and fear exist almost everywhere, and on average, they're pushing voters to the right. You see it all over Europe. You saw it already at the end of last year in the Dutch elections, where Geert Wilders finally succeeds in winning the most votes, far-rightist, not yet put a government together. But one of the consequences is that candidates, particularly these parties that are in the ascendancy, run against minorities, and they run against migrants in particular. Part of the rise in anti-Semitism is wrapped up in this. And it's a real force, and it exists all over the world. One of the results of that world is that you don't look up, you look down. It's all about local politics. It's all about local problems and local perceptions. So at a time, and this is what the Tallberg Foundation is all about, we're about global solutions to global problems. At a time when all the problems that are really big are global, our politics are becoming increasingly national and local. I'll talk about polls in a minute. Nobody in America cares about foreign policy. Ukraine gets 0, literally in the polls. Nobody cares, and that has consequences. One of the consequences, of course, is this kind of election cycle is going to drive horrible economic policy. And that's in a condition where too many countries, too many companies, too many individuals have way too much debt. So will there be a financial crisis this year? Who knows? But I wouldn't bet against it. And finally, disinformation and deepfakes. I'll talk about it in the U.S. context particularly, but I don't know if you can see that. That is an image of Dr. Fauci, who ran the COVID programs in the United States, and Donald Trump. And it's an image of them hugging. That is a false image which is being used in the United States by one of his opponents because Fauci's very unpopular, COVID's very unpopular. Let's see if we can brand Trump with Fauci. So it's going to be everywhere, and it's going to seriously affect all our elections, and it could change the nature of democracy this year. Not for the better. So let's go to the main ring in the circus here. These two men will almost certainly be the candidates on November 5th. I'll talk about it in some detail, but again, all of the noise you hear and all the stuff, it's almost certain, unless God intervenes, that those are the candidates. The problem is a majority of Democrats and a majority of Republicans don't want those candidates. But they don't have alternatives. They're not going to find alternatives. It is already game over. This is popularity. Nobody likes either of them. They don't like them for different reasons, and that's terribly important. But President Biden, on the bottom's approval rating, which is that ugly sort of purple color, has been bad, not quite from the start, but consistently for a couple of years now. Majority of Americans don't approve of his performance, don't think he's up to the job. On specific policies, which I'll come to, think he has not done well. Trump is, of course, a majority disapprove. That doesn't say much of anything about how they're going to vote. It says that you can't find very many Americans that are happy about this election. There's something wrong. It's not that Trump's the problem, the system's the problem. As an American voter, I am now going to, for the second time in a row, going to have to choose between these two people, and I don't like it. And I don't know anybody that does, but there's no way. We're locked in the system, and it's really the political party system that is broken. So the Daily Mail, which is not the world's best newspaper, but they did pay a pollster to go to the United States and ask 1,000 likely voters for one word association with Trump and one word with Biden. This is the word cloud that resulted from it. The political advisors I've talked to have said, you know, that's a really good summary of how they're running for office. Now, if you're a Democrat and the biggest word is nothing, That probably is not a good symbol. If you're a Republican or a Trumper and you got those kinds of words, you ought to be scared to death. Fascinating point. Donald Trump tweeted this on the right-hand side to his millions of followers because he's proud of it, because he thinks it does accurately reflect who he is and what he's doing. He saw it as an advertisement for his candidacy, not as a criticism of his candidacy. Your conclusions. So what issues? We'll still have issues. This is not really an issue election in the main. It's a personality election. And indeed, if you follow American politics, you watched for 6 months last year President Biden talk about Bidenomics and pound on tables and say, this is about the economy, and the economy's great. Every time he talked, his poll numbers went down. So by the end of the year, they decided, no, it's not about the economy, it's going to be about Trump. So you've just ceded, in terms of the way political campaigns are run, you've said, okay, Trump, we accept. This is going to be about you. Evil, not evil. But issues still do matter, and they matter more. The right side is some ways more important than the left side, but the left side will explain why Trump is a serious candidate. This is, once again, it's the economy stupid. Bill Clinton was right. It is still right. Every poll, every focus group, every conversation is about the economy, and almost nothing in second place. Get the economy right, you will be president of the United States. Only 15% of Americans, at least in this poll by Emerson College, said democracy is at risk, and that's what's most important to us. And then immigration. No other issue in any poll I've seen recently has cleared single digits. So I said, Ukraine 0, foreign policy 2, et cetera, et cetera. This is what people care about, and all the rest is noise. The right-hand side sort of matters. Abortion is obviously an important issue to a lot of Americans. Almost a fifth of Americans say, however, they will not vote for someone who doesn't share their view on abortion. Now, that could be either way, remember. But this is a threshold issue. The only other significant threshold issues are those, but we didn't used to have threshold issues. You were for something, not against something. These people are saying, if you're against this, against my view on who either won the election or stole the election last time, I can't vote for you. And that reflects the sort of anger that is building in America. So I was trained as an economist those many years ago, and so I worry about things like growth rates and inflation rates and unemployment rates. It turns out that voters do not. And economists and political economists, and I think political scientists, have been looking at voters entirely wrong. So the conventional wisdom, which you read all the time, is the American economy, Bidenomics. The American economy is recovering, inflation is coming down, unemployment has disappeared, happy times are here again. This is what people consistently are telling the pollsters. Under Biden, only 24% of Americans think they're better off. It's election over. That's the issue right there. For whatever reason, put aside whether they're all stupid, no, Hillary was wrong. I'll tell you why in a second. They don't think they've benefited. And their memory is that the good old times were under Trump. You'll see why I'm thinking how I'm thinking about this election. But for a lot of people, it's reality. It's reality. It's what the economy is doing to them. Something, as you can see, like almost 60% of Americans are saying they're having a tough time paying bills each week. Those aren't happy campers. Those aren't happy voters. Those are why that Biden number is so long. You're having trouble paying your bills. Some of them, a lot of trouble. And we're in the era of feelings, right? They're stressed out about it. They're worried about it. They're not, I'm personally happy, but oh my God, how am I going to buy a cup of coffee at $5 or $10? And then the stuff at the bottom. We're looking at a medical system which isn't the best in the world. It is the most expensive in the world. But a quarter of people are consistently saying they are not getting their medical procedures done because they can't afford it. That says something about our insurance system, it says something about our medical system, but mostly it says something about our economy. So this for me was a light bulb going on. I always believed in inflation, and I've spent years talking and writing blah, blah, blah. Turns out people don't care about inflation, they care about prices. Now that sounds obvious, And if you stand in a grocery line in an American supermarket and listen to people complain about how much milk costs and how much ground beef costs and how much chicken costs, et cetera, and you sort of see the lines, you may not be able to read them, but you can see them, that prices, we had the inflationary burst after the pandemic. Prices went up, and they've stayed up. So the rate of increase has slowed down. That's what we all call inflation. But prices haven't come down. And what voters want is the good old days when a hot dog at Yankee Stadium didn't cost $6 or $7, which is what it costs today. When a ticket to Yankee Stadium on average today costs $104. That, if you've got you're a working guy and you want to take your 2 kids to the game, you're spending $500 on a baseball game. You do it, and you do it actually by taking out debt, which is a different problem. So Biden's going to have a problem until those prices come down, and those prices are not coming down. This is huge. This is the core of the problem. We all hear about the Trumpers and Trump, oh, I won, but 40% of Americans believe, and this is consistent across a lot of polling, that President Biden was not legitimately elected. 40%. And it's not all the crazy Republicans. Remember that, this is important. Something on the order of 1/4 of Americans identify as Republicans, maybe 30% as Democrats. All the rest are independent. So when you keep on hearing, oh, the Republican voters think this, no. You want to know what the independent voters think, because that's who elects presidents. And look at the numbers on independent voters. They also doubt. Even some Democrats doubt whether he won. What happens when you don't believe in elections? That's a problem. Immigration's a problem. Those are the southern border numbers. You live with it, so you know it. The irony of this slide, of this information, if you think about U.S. migration policy under Trump and under Biden, it's exactly the same. There have been almost no changes in our policy. Title 42, all the stuff. Biden's policy has been, whatever you think of it, no better or worse than Trump's policy. Yet the numbers have exploded. Why? Because we're not enforcing it on the one hand, and because word of mouth, if you go down and do focus groups in Central America, ask them if America's borders are open, the answer is yes, America's borders are open. Doesn't matter. We send people down to the United States to tell them borders aren't open. They don't believe us. You get those kind of numbers. We're even getting significant growth on migration across the northern border. And you never hear about that because if you want to be bored, go to our northern border. But people are now starting to go to the northern border because this is getting a little crowded. So migration has become a huge issue, even for the Democrats. Democratic Party, which has always been pro-more immigration, at least in words, if not in action, is now split. So the Democratic mayors of our big cities suddenly have, if you've been in New York recently, you've seen this, suddenly have lots of migrants in their downtowns. We just had, at the start of this week in New York, a really bad storm, huge flooding. In anticipation of the storm, the city authorities decided they had to move a large number of migrants from a tent encampment into the gymnasium of a high school. And to do that, they then called off school the next day, made school remote. People went nuts. Democrats in a Democratic city, as New York is, went nuts. How can you be shutting schools because you're housing migrants in a school in a school facility? If I was in charge of migration, I probably would have done it too, because it was probably a pretty awful place to be in that tent that night. But it's become a big issue, and it's become a confused issue. So who do you think's better at it? Again, this is one set of polls, this Wall Street Journal from 2 weeks ago. If it's about the economy, if it's about crime, if it's about the border, if it's about Israel, Trump. If it's, if you will, the soft stuff, and soft stuff is important, if it's about abortion, if it's about the tone in politics, it's Biden. So what? Before I tell you who I think is going to win, what would a Biden 2 government look like versus what might a Trump 2 government look like? These are at least my answers. The biggest problem for both re-elected presidents, or either re-elected president, will be staffing their cabinet. There is no doubt that no one of consequence will work for Trump. Not going to happen. There's also no doubt that, if you remember, towards the end of his government, he stopped asking the Senate to approve his nominees, which by law he's supposed to do. And he realized that if he appointed you as the acting Secretary of Defense, you were entirely dependent on him, not dependent on him and the Senate. So he said, why am I bothering with the Senate? I'm just going to appoint temporary, and if somebody doesn't like it, they can sue me, which is how Donald Trump responds to almost everything. On the Republican side, those of you who are business leaders, and I won't ask you to say it out loud, is there anyone in this current American cabinet that you would hire? And with my clients for decades, that has been for me the critical test. Is there anybody out there that you would bring into your C-suite? My answer is absolutely, positively not. Yours may be different, but we haven't had really strong cabinets, I would argue, for at least 20 years. Some of the Obama cabinets weren't bad, especially the first term. But you got to go back to when the quality of our leadership at that level was good. I don't have to read all that. You can read all that. This is one of those elections, you know this though, where it really matters who wins. Fundamentally different visions of what should the country be, where should it be going, not so clear on some of that, but how it should get there. The last one, and again, a lot of you are business people, this administration is fiscally imprudent. We just ran a 7.3% deficit to GDP in the last year of an endless expansion. It's nuts. Debt is 120% of GDP. Those are Argentine numbers. We don't yet have Argentine inflation, and we probably won't. But our fiscal position is untenable. It's out of control. Oops, something's happened. On the contrast, Trump is fiscally ignorant. There's just nothing going on. There's no strategy. There's no thought. There's no coherent structure. We badly need, and I hate to say this because I'd pay for it, badly need a tax increase. Nothing, that's not going to happen. All sorts of things going on. The two last points on this. One is the border. Trump will try to close the border, whether it's with the Army, the National Guard, a wall, or all of the above. We are headed towards, I said this to a group this morning, I think, whether or not Trump's elected, over the next decade, I think we're going to try to militarize the border. I think it can be done. I think it would be awful, it would be horrible, it screws up all sorts of things, including Mexico. But that's floating around policy circles, that the only solution is really to shut it down, and it can be shut down. And borders can be shut down. They always used to be shut down. Look at the Russian border. Look at what the Swedes are doing with their border with Russia, systematically closing it now, and they believe they can shut it. The other point is about tariffs. President Trump, too, has already said, literally, it's a bumper sticker, tariffs on everything. We import too much. And he said a 25% across-the-board tariff. So everyone's trying to figure out, does that mean if it's above 25, it's coming down? Does that mean 25 on top of everything? And it's Trump, so it doesn't mean anything. But it does mean they're working on how do you put tariffs on everything. Never mind USMCA, never mind other commitments. That's the direction his policy people, such as they are heading. So who's going to win? If the election's today, Donald Trump is the next president of the United States. And wouldn't even need odds to say that. I don't see how President Biden is reelectable at this point, and I unfortunately see how Trump can be reelected. That's not my choice. It's years ago, an Argentine client asked me about an American election. I gave an answer sort of like that one. And he said, wait a minute, I want not your heart, I want your head. Because my head answer on this is Trump can be reelected. Now, in little parentheses there, what about the X factors? Two big X factors. One is neither of these guys are in the prime of health, let's put it that way. Re-elected Biden would be 82. Re-elected Trump would be 77. You see the pictures. Even Trump has now publicly said, I'm fat. So you have to wonder about whether either of them or both of them make it to the election and then to the inauguration in January. Now, I deliberately did not mention yet the other X factor, and you're all saying, why hasn't he talked about Trump and the trials? And I haven't talked about Trump and his legal issues because, in my judgment, they don't matter. There are 4 criminal trials with 91 indictments. There's a handful of civil trials, one of which is about to finish, which is about money, not about jail. And there are constant efforts to take him off ballots legally. It is a Marshall Plan for lawyers in the United States, but it doesn't matter to the electorate. It's been quite clear. In fact, there's so many cases going on, and Trump is so good at bad stuff that he's managed to weaponize the attacks. So perfect example was yesterday they had in a New York courtroom the last day, the summation of a civil trial. He's already been adjudicated to have lied on his financials. Real surprise. And this is now for committing fraud, and fraud in New York code doesn't have to have hurt anyone. It has to be objectively fraud. So it doesn't matter that anyone was defrauded. It matters that you committed fraud. Okay, New York. And the court is now trying to figure out what's the penalty. The highest bid at the moment is a fine of $370 million. That would pretty come close to taking out all of the cash he seems to have. So there's a lot at stake here. Trump had wanted to address the court in his defense. Judge said, sure, as long as you stick to the issues before us. No political speeches, none of this grieving stuff, none of this attack on me. They eventually decided it was not possible for Trump not to do those things. So they didn't schedule him. So yesterday, his lawyers finished their long summations. It's almost over. His lawyer pops up his hand and says, Judge, my client would like to say something. Before the judge could say no, Trump starts talking. And he does it Trump. He talks about how you're picking on me, how it's unfair that I'm here. You should be paying me for all the things I've done for New York. This is outrageous. And the judge literally is there saying, counsel, please get your client under control. Please get your client under control. But he stopped before they could call the bailiff to throw him out. So he got his word in edgewise. You look at the New York Times today, big stories about what Trump had to say, and the Post has it on the front page. This is a guy who knows how to weaponize grievance in a country where no one trusts judges. They don't trust courts. It's consistent in every polling we do. They don't trust the system. Trump has stood up and say, I'm for you. They're attacking me because of you. And so I'm going to take all this. And his polls go up. And literally as a result, his polls go up. The other X factor is when I mentioned, if Americans already don't really trust how voting works, imagine a world where we have endless capacity for deep fakes, for disinformation, for misinformation, literally for attacking the electronic machines. In New York, we're back to voting with pencils. Because you trust your money, your will, your family to the net. You don't trust your vote to the net. I guarantee you, not just in the United States, but everywhere, bad guys are going after the process. And this is the risk to democracy. We end a year with all of these elections having been adjudicated, one way or the other, with this having happened, and more people simply won't trust that my vote was counted in a way that actually affected the outcome. That's a problem. So, war. It wasn't that long. I gave a speech back in the 90s, I guess, at a university in the United States, not here. And I said something about, we're going to have future wars. I had kids in the back screaming at me, you're a warmonger. You believe in war. No, I don't believe in war. I believe in that. That is every measure of the incidence of conflict that kills people, has gone up. Now, the nature of war has changed. We don't have many interstate wars. We have Ukraine-Russia, though. We have a lot of wars between states and non-states. Hamas is an example. We have a lot of conflicts between non-state actors. I don't know what you call the Mexican conflict, but that's in these numbers too. I'm not going to show you the numbers, but if you look at the numbers of casualties, war deaths is going through the roof. Now that is specifically because of the two conflicts going on now, but war is back. Part of the problem is the collapse of governance in too many places. One of the reasons why you worry about Hezbollah in Lebanon is they are the actual government. They're the ones that deliver food. They deliver health and security. We've seen that in parts of Mexico, actually, as you know, where the government is no longer doing what governments are supposed to be doing. So you have this fragmentation of who's on first, who's in charge. And it's partly, in political terms, the loss of the monopoly on violence. So why more war? Partly it's because the nations whose job it is to prevent war are turning inward. I said that earlier. The politics tell you, don't worry about Ukraine, worry about Peoria. That's going to elect me. The Russians, but this started not in 2014 or 2019, this started in 2008. Putin got up in Munich and gave a speech and said, you guys have rigged the game against us. You've made promises to us after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, and you've behaved differently. So we're going to change. We're going back to it's Russian revanchism. We're going back to becoming a great power again. There is this coalition of powers, China, Russia, North Korea, but it's more than just sort of this. If we had the speechmaker again, this would be a nice axis of evil, but it's become the dominant dynamic in global politics. There's more coherence among these guys than there is among the rest of us. Think about the Venezuelans in Guyana. Why now? Why out of the clear blue sky, at a moment when you have all of this mess going on everywhere, do the Venezuelans who were trying to get closer to the Americans and succeeding, decided it'd be a great time to take a whack at Guyana? I'd bet you a nickel, but only a nickel, that because it sort of works as these guys talk about the chaos and their approach to the world that they're trying to encourage. I know that sounds like a conspiracy theory, but I don't believe in accidents. I do believe in conspiracies. State-sponsored, we have proxy wars now. They had gone away after the decline of the Soviet Union. War has become democratic, small d. It's really easy to be a significant military power. Look at the use of drones in the Ukraine war. Tactics and strategy in war are changing literally daily in these two wars that are going on. They're becoming much more technological. They're killing a lot of civilians. They're killing very few combatants. And that's the way you want to fight if you're in America. Non-state arms groups, and defense spending. We're about our new budget. We just agreed on a budget number for next year, the current fiscal year. We're going to spend $900 billion on our defense budget. For the first time in a while, that is significantly more than we're going to spend on non-defense. Everybody agrees that NATO should spend more money on defense. Everybody knows the Chinese are spending more money. They're building a blue water navy. You've had a dramatic increase in defense spending. And that sort of has a knock-on effect in terms of the environment, the worldview, the allies, the sales of all this stuff. And I think we're starting to witness the breakup of a global order that served us for so well from the 50s through the aughts, maybe into 2020. 75 years of the most prosperous, peaceful time on Earth. We're at the end of it, and it's partly because the system is coming apart. Do these two wars matter? They matter enormously to the United States, and that's a problem. But they matter beyond the United States because they both, in their own ways, very different ways, threaten the status quo. In terms of the Hamas war, the Middle East was on its way towards some kind of new organization. We're witnessing a Middle East that for the first time since Napoleon shows up in Alexandria, the foreigners are mostly gone. Between 1805 and more or less now, you can date it with us leaving Afghanistan, first the French, then the Ottomans, then the French and the British, then us, have sort of been the guiding framework on the Middle East. We were the enforcers of the rules. Oh, the Russians in there too, very importantly in there too. We're all gone. We're playing on the sides. You just saw American jets in the air over the Red Sea last night. But the Middle East is on its own, and that might be a good thing. What did we see last year? We saw rapprochement between Iran and Saudi, bitter enemies, supposedly. I've seen a series of treaties between Arab countries and Israel. The Saudis were on the verge of a treaty with Israel before this started, which is part of the reason why it started, by the way. They're trying to work out a new way to live together without all these other people. That's at risk, may or may not succeed. It has created a huge gap between the Americans and the Europeans. I think we've made a strategic mistake by embracing the Israelis as firmly as we embrace them. It was horrible what happened when Hamas came across the border. There's no justification. Butcher, you pick the bad word you want, and then you kill 30,000 people? There's a problem here, and it's quite clear that what's going on is that Israel is trying to secure its borders in the old-fashioned way. We thought, again, we thought this was part of the past. Russia's doing the same thing, right? They're trying to change their borders the old-fashioned way. But the world's outraged at Israel, and the world is split over Ukraine. The problem with the Russian war is that whenever it ends, however it ends, and it'll be a cold peace, but that's a different point, Russia's still there. Geography is determinative. So how does Europe not live with Russia? Unanswerable question. It has to, one way or the other. But it's reopened all the security questions. It's reopened all the border questions. If I were to give a speech about Ukraine in Estonia, they'd stone me, because I think this is a crazy war that is very little good can come out of and ought to end. So what are the consequences? The Russians, if a war of attrition with a country 3 times your size, guess who's going to win the war of attrition? This one, again, is pretty easy. So you're not going to fight to the end because Ukraine can't win. The questions become, what are the arrangements? Who pays for it? Who guarantees it? There are no answers to those questions yet. One of the little problems, and this is a really bad idea, many people in the United States and Europe say they have an answer to who pays for it. It should be the Russians, because we froze all those assets. In some cases, we stole them, public and private. And there's a movement which is having trouble finding legal basis to say, well, let's use all those assets to rebuild Ukraine. Now, from a moral point of view, obviously it's right. From a legal point of view, it's very tenuous. And from a national interest point of view of the United States, do you really want to send the signal that if you keep your reserves at the Federal Bank of New York, Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and we get mad at you, we can just take them? Remember, we did not declare war on the Russians. There is no legal basis for that. We said, you're bad guys, you got money here, it's frozen. And we're trying to find ways to keep it. That, from a national interest point of view, is simply stupid. On the Hamas side, Israel side, Israel can destroy Hamas. It's fallacy that you can't destroy a terrorist movement. It's been done, it'll be done again. That's not to say that you're not creating new terrorists. You are creating new terrorists. The Palestinian problem, this is going to sound awful, and I'm on the record, I shouldn't say this, but I just warned myself. The Palestinians suffer from the same thing the Kurds suffer from, the Rohingya suffer from. There's lots of groups that are just left out. They have just lost in the great wheel of fortune of history. And that's tragic. It's certainly tragic if I were a Palestinian, a Rohingya, a Tibetan. Think of all the people who don't have independent, peaceful, prosperous states. The Palestinians aren't going to get one. I think the two-state solution, which has systematically failed since '48, can't work. I was trained when I did investment decisions, if a deal won't close, give up, because it's not going to close. They've been trying to close the two states forever. This is a horrible shock, but out of that, what positive comes? And there's no answer to the question. Then you have the region. Will that new architecture continue to develop? It's the stunning thing, badly reported, about the last 95 days of war is how little war there has been. In the good old days, the Arab Street blows up. Cairo's a mess. The Iranians go to war. Hezbollah is blowing the hell out of northern Israel. None of that's happened. Why? Because they want a different future. They want this to go away. They have no better ideas than I have how to make it go away. They're hoping. I had a diplomat, an Arab diplomat, say to me, "This is awful, but they just got to get it done fast." And this person is not awful, very realpolitik, said, we want a future. Now, is there a future for the Palestinians? I don't know. Donald Rumsfeld is not my favorite Secretary of Defense, but his great claim to fame was known unknowns and unknown unknowns. There's lots of known unknowns. We know there are hotspots all over the place, any of which could explode into serious war. I don't think Taiwan should be on that list. We can talk about it if you want. What would a U.S. constitutional crisis look like? Fact of the matter is, the U.S. Constitution has almost no requirements to become President of the United States. You have to be 35. You have to be a native-born resident of the United States. Punto, end of discussion. Can you run for office from the prison? Yes, it's been done before. Eugene Debs ran for office from prison. He didn't win, but he ran for office. Could you govern from prison? No reason why not. There's nothing in either the Constitution or the law that precludes a convicted criminal from being president of the United States. You can't vote in some states, that's a different problem, but you can be president. So let's assume scenario, play a scenario. Trump wins. These cases, none of which are going to actually be adjudicated and finished until probably next year. 2 of them are federal, 2 of them are state. He's President of the United States. He says to his Attorney General, stop those cases. He can do that entirely within. We want the Justice Department to withdraw from those cases. The cases collapse. The 2 state cases, New York and Georgia, let's assume he loses one of them. So is the governor of New York going to send the National Guard of New York to pound on the White House door to take him to jail? Odds aren't very good that she would do that. But then what? This balance between Washington and the states, that's what we fought, if you remember, a civil war over. So we've got these big constitutional questions maybe coming at us. And we don't know how to handle a constitutional crisis very well. New technologies are proliferating, good, bad, and ugly. That is both. Some of them are wonderful, some of them aren't, but we've democratized it, and that's the known unknown. It is game over on climate change the way we've been thinking about it. We could spend hours and days discussing this, but it's real simple. Remember 1.5? We can't go beyond 1.5. Well, we just did. The numbers are quite clear. So now 2. Can we go beyond 2? Next time you read an article about climate change, ask yourself, are they asking about the climate on Earth, on land, or on sea? We live in a wet planet. 70% of the Earth is water. What you care about is how the water is heating. You ever been in the kitchen? Water heats very slowly and then stays hot, right? Turn the heat off on boiling water, stick your hand in it, and you will regret it. But you just take something out of the oven, it cools off real fast. All of us cooks can't figure out how do you keep it hot enough so they can have second helpings. So that's happening. The numbers are quite clear. We are in a period of dramatic climate change. The approach we've had, this COP stuff, is just not done anything. Part of it is we don't have any decent global governance because we're looking down, not up. So name and shame didn't work, and it's out of the kitchen. In 1977, and I'll stop in a second, in 1977, President Carter is in office. His science advisor brings him a 2-page memo about climate change, 1977. It was accurate on all the headline points. Fundamental climate change, heating of the planet, emissions, blah, blah, blah. We need to act on this. And if you've ever worked with at least an American president, you never write long memos. 2 pages is really long for a president. It went first to James Schlesinger. It went first to the president. The president's initials are on the document. He sent it to Schlesinger and said, what do you think? Schlesinger was Secretary of Energy, the first Secretary of Energy. Schlesinger said, we don't know enough, so let's study it, which is what you always do when you don't want to do something, right? So imagine if in '77 the United States had said, oh my God, let's actually begin to think about this serious problem when you could make changes that would indeed have had consequences. We didn't, and we're where we are. And then the business many of you are in, where are the leaders that are going to get us out of this mess? Everything I've talked about other than climate change can be reversed with the right leadership. Everything. Climate change is a no-no. I mean, that's just going to happen. We can adapt to it. We can't mitigate it. But it's about leaders. And until we get serious about looking for different kinds of leaders, training different kinds of leaders, nurturing different kinds of leaders, we're going to be in this endless rinse and repeat cycle, all of it which will leave the world looking like that. So I told you I was a hopeful pessimist. You're still smiling, at least some of you. You're smiling at Hieronymus Bosch here. Let me stop there and see if any of it has raised any questions that you might want to ask. Do you want to come?
Thank you very much, Alan, for this very sharp and thought-provoking presentation. Everything seems to be geopolitics today, and you gave us a lot to think about the consequences of the topics that you touched upon, particularly a second Trump presidency, which is a green perspective for Mexico. I think we can open up a round of questions. And we can take 2 or 3 questions from the audience. So if you want to raise your hand, and we can approach a microphone, and I'll ask you to introduce yourselves. There's always like this shy moment in which the audience is thinking if they will dare. Oh, yes, up there, please. ¿Le pueden acercar un micrófono, por favor? Could you state your question in English, or otherwise I can translate?
Political body, and how later administration could, have a worse relationship with the Americans, and the border is going to be a very hard, it could become a tricky point, especially with the rhetoric of the Republicans, of sending the military, for example.
Long question, short answer. In 2016, I was in a meeting with then candidate López Obrador, and I said to him, Trump, blah, blah, blah. And he said to me, Trump is your problem, not our problem, and, which I thought was absolute political genius, and he governed that way. Second point, that won't work anymore. And the reason it won't work is all of the stuff I talked about. But the problem is this, and it's been a problem for my entire engagement in Mexico-US issues. There's a tendency to say, oh, it's a government problem. Oh, let the presidents and the cabinet solve it. And it isn't wonderful when cabinet secretaries get together and have these stupid meetings up on the border. They're going to solve it. I don't know what you think about your cabinets. I know what I told you what I think about my cabinets. And it's not working. It hasn't worked. There is no consensus among the American elite, including the business elite, about foreign policy. It just isn't. The good old consensus that drove the David Rockefellers of the world to engage so much with Mexico doesn't exist anymore. It's not that the opposite exists. There's not an anti-Mexican feeling. There's just nothing. It's that big word on the Biden slide. So the challenge, I think, is how do you, and I've said this to the last couple of Mexican administrations, none of whom thought it made sense, how do you create a new elite interest in a healthy bilateral relationship, in a win-win bilateral relationship. Waiting for the governments is waiting for Godot. It won't happen. But I'll bet you a nickel that our next president and your next president will continue to do that. And I'll bet you another nickel that our business and you will also continue to wait for the governments. And if you do, then it's become much more antagonistic, much less productive, at a moment when, look, we thought we lived in a world where geography would no longer matter. Wake-up call for the 21st century. Geography is everything. I've said for at least 20, 30 years, the most important foreign policy challenge to the United States is by definition Mexico. I know almost no one who agrees with that. And it's not because Mexico's a problem, it's because Mexico's here. You have the same geographic reality, but you don't do anything about it. You wait for the next president to come up with, so do something about it, would be the answer to your question.
Great, thank you. We can take 2 more questions.
And ITAM could take a leadership role in doing that. Just.
So the gentleman here in the middle, can you approach a microphone? And there's also someone up there, and I think that's it because we're running out of time.
Tempus fugit.
Now I can ask you my question. I have actually 2. The U.S. economy is expected to have grown with 2.4% in 2023. How much do you think that is the weight of the weapons sold to Ukraine and also the energy now sold to Europe in replacement of the Russian one? And my next question is, what do you think that President Trump will do regarding the war in Ukraine?
I'm sorry, sir. Could you introduce yourself? I'm sorry.
Yes, it's Fernando Duarte. Thank you.
You ask and imply that war is good business. We are the world's largest oil exporter. These wars keep oil prices, oil and gas exporter, by the way. So it's good from that point of view. It's good from we're one of the world's largest food producers, good from that point of view. And we have a very, very large defense establishment, good from that point of view. So I can't give you a number, but it's not bad. It's not bad business. The second was about what's going to happen in Ukraine. Look, you know the outcome, you just don't know the date of the outcome. The outcome is a cold peace. There will be something like the Korean settlement, something like the Cyprus non-settlement, something like that, ceasefire, some adjustment of the border. That's the easy part of it. The hard part is the money, as I mentioned earlier. The second hard part is the war criminal stuff. We didn't used to fight wars and decide people were war criminals during the war. War criminals are about winning the war. And the winners get to choose who the war criminal was. That almost always happens. Here, however, we've had endless teams of lawyers wandering around collecting data about war criminals. Is Putin a war criminal? I'm on the record. Absolutely yes. Are you willing to sacrifice peace to enforce that? I doubt it. But it's how do you undo these processes once you've started them? And then the largest question is, as I said, if I'm in Estonia or Poland or several other places along that border, they would say, if the Russians win by not losing and getting territory in Ukraine, they're coming here next. That makes no sense. And it makes no sense because of 4 letters, NATO. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. We have no obligation to fight for, and we're not fighting. We're willing to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. That's an immoral policy. We are committed. We have troops in Poland. We have missiles in Poland. We will fight for NATO. There's no doubt in my mind about it. So you either believe in this stuff, so why do you want to put Ukraine in NATO if it doesn't matter? It makes no sense. So I think The problem Europe has, very precisely, the problem Germany has, every element of Germany's last 20-year strategy is in the toilet. They bet on cheap Russian and ready available Russian energy. They bet on access to the Chinese market, unfettered. Look who owns a significant portion of German auto industry. And they bet on disarmament. There is no German army. Part of the reason why they can't find shells to give to the Ukrainians is they don't have any shells. So suddenly they're living in a different world, not just the Germans, but also the French, and also all of Europe. So Europe has this little problem. They have no strategy. Why is it that Europe never grows anymore? They don't know how to grow. How do they, so they're saying, we're never going to touch the Russians again. Oh my God, it's frozen forever. We're saying you can't have an intimate relation with the Chinese on anything that is interesting technologically. Something's got to give. And I fear it's the US-European relationship that could well give. They need China more than they need us. I think they think. I think they're wrong, but I think they think that.
Thank you. And we have a last question here.
Hi, my name is Sebastián Pérez de las Heras. My question is, currently watching the Republican debates lately, you see two visions, the kind of more the guys that have more of a war tendency and the people that are absolute protectionists of the United States and do not want to get involved in foreign policy. My question is, how do you see the Chinese and United States relationship developing if either Biden's foreign policy nothing side wins or Trump's side against China wins? How do you think that relationship develops, and how does Taiwan come into place into this kind of escalating conflict?
So I've got 2 minutes and 28 seconds. Taiwan is easy. We know geography matters. We can't defend Taiwan. It's indefensible. Sooner or later, like Hong Kong, like Macau, it's part of the PRC. When, how? Terribly interesting question. The Chinese do not want to invade Taiwan. They need Taiwan as an industrial platform. They need the semiconductor companies. They need all of that stuff. They've showed us, if you want to talk about tactics, what they would do is they would isolate it, they'd surround it, they would do what we tried to do with, what we did do with Cuba and the Russians, and they would say, fine, come attack us. Will we go to nuclear war over Taiwan? No. So that one's easy. When it happens, Xi has told us by 2049 the answer is the answer. 2049 is probably not a year that any of us are spending too much time worrying about, which is the Chinese way to say, we know the answer, we'll let you know when it's important. I think you totally mischaracterize the current US policy vis-a-vis China. It is incredibly aggressive in its tonality, in its substance. I don't think, in fact, I'd even make the case that Trump is an isolationist. I was going to say at his heart, but I don't think he has one. At his core, he does have a core. And he respects strength because he's a bully. So he may well respect at some level Chinese strength because he sees them as bullies. But there, at the moment, the quality of conversation between the two countries about the future is very low. It's very poor. 38 seconds. One last point. Shortly after Xi came to power, President Obama was in office. The Chinese asked for a summit. They wanted a summit to discuss the future of world order. And it was held in the Annenberg Estate in California, and it was several days of talking, and they proposed, make a long story very short, without all the cute anecdotes, they proposed a condominium. They said, look, the world's changed, we're the rising power, you're the legacy power, you're not going away anytime soon, but we're coming, and we think we need to rethink how the globe is organized. They just told me time is up. The long story is we said no. We like the world the way it works because it's our world. And the Chinese said, we think you're making a mistake. And they tried a couple more times, and we kept on with the same answer. And what's happened since then? North Korea is a nuclear power. They weren't at the time. You've built a whole set of institutions that look like mirror images of the Bretton Woods institutions in Asia, but with their leadership. You have some weird thing called the BRICS, which started as an investment meme, but has become something that looks like they're trying to turn it into a version of the G7, which is becoming, it's still a joke, I'm not arguing the opposite, but it looks like it has more future than I would argue the G7 has. So we're headed into this competition. We finally figured out that the root of a lot of their accomplishment were next generation semiconductors, so we've frozen that business. Back in the day, that would have been an act of war, and the Chinese see it as an act of war. So you're stacking up these issues on both sides that, if I were a young man, I'd be worried about, because we don't have a shared vision of how the world ought to work. That's what happened in San Francisco when the UN was created. It sustained us for a long time. It's gone, and there's no effort. Again, I think ITAM should be doing this. There's no effort to say, well, what is the organizing principle for the future of a globe that is, for the first time in the history of mankind, actually global? That's what this technology has done. It's made it a global globe, and that's fundamentally new. It's incredibly cool. It's incredibly, opportunities come out of that. But if we mismanage it, if we continue to mismanagement as we are mismanaging it, the oops on this one will get into a Homer Simpson cartoon. So thank you very much. That's all, folks.
Thank you very much.